I'm glad you could join me for our 5th and final lesson of the series on butterfly attracting plants, featuring a painting on azaleas. I have seen lots of swallowtail and yellow sulfur butterflies on the azaleas in my backyard. I will be using a technique called glazing on this one. Glazing is where you apply a layer of transparent watercolor paint on top of a previous paint layer which is thoroughly dried. It can be the same color or a different color, and this technique will give you depth and substance to your painting. I remember admiring a painting at an art show, and the artist was telling me that she had 14 layers of glazes of paint on that particular painting. So you can consider more than one glaze if you want to. You can just keep applying layers on top of previous layers as long as the previous layers are completely dry. I would also like to try a different treatment on the background of this painting as well. So let's begin with an initial wash of color on the Formosa azalea petals. I've got the sketch transferred onto the paper, and we're not using any masking fluid for this one, so we can go ahead and get started with the painting of the petals. I'm just going to brush this off quickly, make sure we don't have any lint on there. And what I first have done is to mix up some of a pink for the petals. I mixed up some permanent magenta, some opera pink again, and hopefully I'll get a nice Formosa colored pink for the azalea petals. That's probably the most common azalea that you see around, and it's a little bit of a fluorescent purplish pink color. It's an unusual color, but permanent magenta does a good job with that on a lot of flower petals. And I also mixed up some colors for the leaves. I've got a light green, a sap green with a permanent yellow light, and I also have the sap green with some ultramarine blue mixed in. So I'm going to start by not putting any water on first. Let's see how that works on the paper first. I usually work from left to right. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but I do have some pistils and stamens drawn in here, and I'm just going to paint right over those. It will probably dissolve that graphite, but that's okay. We have a plan for that later. We may have to retrace them. That's a little dark, but I think that it will dry a little bit lighter. We'll see. I also have some back sides of the petals that are folded over, and they're going to be lighter. So what I'll do is just dilute this mix a little bit with some water and paint those just a very, very pale color. That worked pretty well without putting water on first. I'm going to skip around so I don't get wet edges touching each other. Sometimes with large leaf areas or petal areas that I don't wet first, I will divide them in half and just do one half at a time, just a habit. This is just an initial layer, and and we're going to let this layer completely dry before we put another layer on. That will be one of your glazing techniques. I'm trying to dilute it just a little bit more. That's why I keep putting my brush in the water, because it's a little dark. Now, if these aren't quite dry yet, and I have to do these other 3 petals, so I may jump down and do a little bit of green. The leaves are either dark or light green. Now, the new growth on the azaleas come out light green, and the older growth is darker green, and then there are just a few leaves that are a medium green. I'll go ahead and do a couple of the light green. Actually, let me do the dark green first, because these light greens are going to be right up against these petals. This is the sap green mixed with ultramarine blue. There is a vein running down the middle of this dark green leaf, and I'm going to try to keep it white. I don't know if I'll be able to be that effective with it, but I'll give it a try. And we don't have to do any lifting later to make a vein. I do half of the leaf first, and then I'll do the other half. Seems to work. I'm going to continue with the pink now. It's okay if it's not a completely even wash, because the petals are not flat and they're reflecting light a little differently. So if there's some light and dark areas, that's okay. I will continue to do the pink petals until I finish, and we'll come back. They're not quite drying fast enough, so I'm just going to have to give them just a little bit of time to dry. We'll be back. I finished the pink on the petals, and I'm going to do a little work on the leaves now. I think I'll start with the light green. Again, on these larger leaves, I'm going to try to leave the vein white. I'll have to wait till those dry just a minute before I start doing some of the dark green ones. One thing you might want to try, you could put a few extra leaves in here. I simplified this sample a little bit more than I did with the original painting. I put a few that looked like they were fading into the background, and so they were a little fuzzy. We could try a couple of those, and they would be not in the foreground, they would be in the background, so they would not be totally in focus. So there are a couple of ways you could do that. I'll try one first and see how it goes. I'm going to make one right here that's light green, and it will be behind this other leaf, so we'll see. I'm just basically going to soften the edges on it. It's not drawn in, I'm just going to put one in there. I'm just going to soften the edges a little bit so it looks like it's not quite in focus. I'll put one more up here. I better put a third one in. It's always good to do things in odd numbers, 1, 3s, and 5s, and so on. I think we can do some of the dark green now. Hopefully this is dry right here. We'll find out. This one up here is kind of a medium green. These are two areas here still wet, so I'm going to wait until I can get these last two leaves. They're going to be a medium green, it looks like. And this one right here is going to be a light green, and that one is going to be a medium green. There is a little bit of detail work in this area here I could do very quickly. Most of that is light green. Just every other area is light green, dark green, light green, dark green, and it doesn't really matter. It's details, but you can check the reference photo if you want to get real detailed about it. I'll go ahead and put in some of the light green. I'll have to get a much smaller brush. Let's do this one. I have to be careful because it's wet right in here. There, I've got some drops. Gotta get rid of those. When that dries, I'll just fill in behind it with some dark green. Before I go, and I'm going to have to get these pink areas completely dry before I put a glaze over it. I'm going to do a glaze of ultraviolet, but I think that I will wait a while for that. So we're going to let that completely dry, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the glazing. There are a few petals that have been turned back so the underside is showing. Now some of them are a darker color and some are lighter color because the light is hitting it. We have 3 areas that I can tell right now that are going to be lighter. There's one right here where the petal has turned over. So let's get those quickly and just use the same pink wash and just dilute it with some water. And there are some other, there's one here and there's one right here. So let's do that and we'll let them dry. I'm just going to take some of this pink mixture and bring it over and put some water in it, make it nice and light. It will show up. We're going to put a sky blue background in it so that will show up when we get the background in. Just a nice pale pink. And then there are some others. There's some areas that are underneath that will be darker. We'll get those later when we use the ultramarine violet. There was another one, but I painted over it. So what we can do later with that is just lift the edge, and that will work. Just take some of the paint off and that will make a lighter area. I think that's good for now. These are still wet, so I'm just going to have to do these last 2 leaves when it dries, and then we'll come back.